Hi, welcome to Story Time with Gigi. Today we're reading another story from the Bible called The Walls of Jericho. Have you ever heard of this story? They have actually found these walls in Israel. This is illustrated by Fran Thatcher. I love her drawings. God had always promised the Israelites that one day he would rescue them from slavery in Egypt and give them a new land in which to live. At last the time came, and Moses led his people out of Egypt, but life was still hard for the Israelites. They wandered for 40 years in the desert before drawing near to their new home. Sadly, Moses, who was very old by then, died before he could enter the promised land. God chose Joshua to be the Israelites' new leader. "You shall have all of this land, which is called Canaan," God told Joshua. "I shall be with you just as I was with Moses, so there is no need to be afraid as long as you obey my laws." And the laws were put there to be a blessing and to guide them, not to be harmful. Joshua was grateful for God's help. He knew that the Israelites would have to fight many battles before they could live happily in their new homeland. The first problem was the city of Jericho, which lay just inside Canaan's border. This was one of the strongest cities in the world. It had high walls and strong gates. Joshua decided to see if there was an easy way for the Israelites to capture it. The spies crept silently into the city, but the king of Jericho soon heard about the two strangers and gave orders for their arrest. Luckily, the two spies met a woman called Rahab. She was friendly to the Israelites. She took the two men into her house, which was built into the city wall, hurried them up to the flat roof, and hid them under a pile of flax. She was just in time. The two strangers had been spotted creeping into Rahab's house, and a few minutes later, the king's soldiers knocked on her door. Rahab went downstairs and told the guards that the men had already left the city. The soldiers believed her and hurried away. Rahab returned to the roof. "Why are you helping us?" asked the spies as they crawled out from their hiding place. "I know God wants you to have this land," explained Rahab, "and I believe he will give you victory. Just promise that when you capture Jericho, my family and I will be kept safe." The spies promised. When it was dark, Rahab lowered a rope from her window. Before she climbed down, one of the spies gave Rahab a red cord. "Put this in your window," he said. "When our soldiers see it, they will know they must protect this house." There's the red rope. When the spies arrived back at the Israelite camp, they told Joshua everything they had seen. "We will attack the city," Joshua announced, "but first we must cross the River Jordan." The River Jordan was very wide, and the Israelites had no boats. But Joshua obeyed God's instructions. He told the priests who carried the gold box called the Ark, which held God's laws, to step into the water first. As they did so, the river stopped flowing, leaving a dry path across the other bank. The priests waited on the path while the rest of the Israelites crossed. When the priests stepped ashore too, the river began to flow once more. God did so many wonderful miracles like this, helping the people of Israel to accomplish what he wanted them to accomplish. So they step into the river and they wait there. See, this is where the water was. The water stopped and it was dry ground for them to go across. And then they walked out and the water flowed again. Neat, huh? "We have reached the promised land at last," cried the Israelites, and they thanked God for bringing them safely to the end of their long journey. "Pick 12 large stones from the river and put them in a pile," Joshua ordered. "The stones will represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and they will remind us of how God has brought us into this new land." The Israelites then began to move towards the city of Jericho. They looked at the high walls and the strong gates, but they did not attack the city right away because God had given Joshua some very strange instructions. Now, it's important to know the walls were so high and so thick, they used to have chariot races on the top of the walls. That's like a wide road, very thick walls. That's how cities were protected from their enemies back then. Joshua called the puzzled Israelites around him to tell them God's plan. God promised us that we will capture the city, he announced, but it will take 7 days. You must all do exactly as I tell you. Every day for 6 days, we will all walk around the city walls. 7 priests will lead us, blowing their trumpets. Behind them will come the other priests, carrying the ark. The rest of us will follow in silence. So they're going to march without any talking amongst themselves, not a word. Have to for 6 days. So each day for 6 days, the Israelites marched around the city just as God had ordered. So there's the priests blowing the trumpets, walking around the city. There's the priests carrying the ark. And there's everybody else walking in silence. The people of Jericho stood on the high walls, watching in amazement. The only sounds they could hear were the loud trumpet blasts blown by the Israelite priests and the tramp, tramp made by the thousands of marching feet. I'm sure they thought that was really strange. On the 7th day, the Israelites walked around the walls of Jericho 7 times. Then they stopped and faced the city. Suddenly, the trumpets blew loudly, and all the Israelites began to shout. The noise was deafening. When the echoes died away, everyone could hear a faint rumbling sound, which grew louder and louder. The Israelites watched in amazement as the mighty walls of the great city of Jericho began to shake, and huge cracks appeared between the stones. Then, with an earth-shaking, roaring crash, the walls of Jericho crumbled and fell to the ground. Look what God's doing. Look what he did. Now, shouted Joshua before the dust had settled, attack! The Israelites rushed forward, cheering. They scrambled over the broken walls and within a very short time captured the city. Some of the Israelites rushed off to find Rahab. The Israelite soldiers spotted the red cord tied to Rahab's window and pulled her and her family to safety. Joshua then reminded his people, "We captured Jericho because we trusted in God. God will also help us all to live happily in the promised land if we trust and believe in him." And that's our story. This is one of my favorites. I hope you liked it. Make sure you like and subscribe and share with your friends. Bye until next time.